Okay, welcome to mini episode 32 of the Sweet Spot podcast. My name is Lynn, your host, and Ken is here joining me this time.
That's right.
And we're really happy to talk to another former Disneyland cast member, as we've been doing that often, and we always like hearing their stories because everyone has their own unique story. And we want to welcome Andy Apodaca, right?
Hey, you did very well.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
That was very good.
Okay, I was hesitant, but I did it.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, so you worked at, you had mentioned to me that you were an annual pass holder before you were a cast member.
Yeah, I was a first generation annual pass holder. You know, they started them in 1983, and I was an annual pass holder from 1983, 84, 85 until I hired into the park as a cast member in 86. Wow. And I have the distinction of, back in those days, they used to sell not just child and adult, but they had child, junior, and adult, which they don't have anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So I still hold on to my annual pass that says junior.
Mm-hmm. That's going way back. The junior designation.
Yeah.
Not only did they get rid of the junior designation, right? But when they did that, it was child was 12 and under. Then maybe 10 years ago, they decided, well, we're going to make child 10 and under. So it was kind of a stealth price increase.
Yeah. The subtle ways they manipulate things to
yes,
generate more revenue. I don't even remember exactly how old the junior span was, but I think I was 14 years old at the time, so it obviously included 14-year-olds.
Oh. I imagine it was 14 or 15. That sounds about right. But
yeah, that kind of makes sense. I would imagine 16-year-old, you're going to charge them an adult price.
Yeah. Well, cool. So then you wanted to work at Disneyland. What made you decide to go down and apply?
I really hesitated for a long time because, Disneyland was a hobby of mine, going there as an annual pass holder. And I always thought to myself, like, is this going to ruin the magic? Is this going to, take away the fun of being there? So I did kind of hesitate for a while, but then I had a lot of friends that started to work there and made friends with people that were there. And I did hire in, and it did kind of ruin the magic.
Really?
Well, I mean, not at first, but, I was there about 10 years, and towards the end of the 10 years, as much as I loved Disneyland, I really wasn't so interested in going into the park anymore because it just felt like work to me. Mm-hmm. But when I quit in 1996 to become a teacher, literally the very day that I quit, I think I went into the park that next weekend, and it was all restored. Mm-hmm. It all felt fun again.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that because when I left, I had just about had enough, and for different reasons. You just been there. I was there almost as long as you were, and I think just like you said, the magic is already kind of ruined, I guess you could say, spoiled. Yeah. But at that point, you're just just so many different things can get in the way. But after being gone for a little bit, then I had this desire, which is partly why I started the podcast, was because I started to miss being around it or talking about it. So,
yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I still to this day, I left in 1996, and still to this day, my core group of friends, they're all people that go back to Disneyland. Mm-hmm. They're all people that either work there or their spouses of people that work there, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, so it's hard to take the, you can take the boy out of Disneyland, but you can't take the, whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's definitely in us.
So you hired in 1986.
Into outdoor vending.
Okay, you started in outdoor. How long were you in outdoor vending before you did something different?
I was in outdoor vending about a year and a half.
Okay.
And I remember a supervisor coming up to me when I wanted to transfer to attractions, because I really always wanted to go to attractions,
Hmm.
and he was trying to talk me out of it. And he said, Andy, attractions is really monotonous, and it's really tedious. You just do the same thing over and over and over again. And I just kind of laughed at that, thinking to myself, well, what do you think this is?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, plus you were in outdoor vending when you had to push the carts.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had to push those heavy things all the way through, and excuse us, please, excuse us, please. And it was back behind the Carousel Theater back then, right? Or
Right, exactly. It's right behind America Sings. Yeah. In fact, when you're bringing back memories of when I was pushing the cart, like when I first started off in outdoor vending, we had to push the carts by ourselves. And then I don't know if there was any accidents or just they were trying to avoid accidents, but partway through the time that I was in outdoor vending, they changed the policy so that you had to push the cart out with somebody, so that there could be somebody to get people out of the way, and then one person to push. And I'll never forget the summer of the 4th of July in, let me think, it would be 1987. It was a Saturday, and it was 4th of July, and it was the busiest, like still to this day, I remember park being. And pushing that cart, across the park into Fantasyland just from America Sings, it took me like 45 minutes. It was so difficult.
Wow, yeah.
It's so crowded.
Yeah, those days.
Like it's in general, it's a lot more crowded in the past 15 years than it ever was back in those days.
Oh yeah, for sure. Consistently more crowded.
Yeah.
So then you said about a year and a half, and then you transferred over to attractions. And was it any specific area at first that you started working?
Well, where I wanted to go was the west side, but they didn't have any openings in the west side, so I went to Tomorrowland. And I worked on subs and Star Tours. And the only reason I got trained on Star Tours is I was just kind of in the right place in the right time. I was walking into the office to check my schedule, and there was this guy from Tokyo Disneyland that they needed to train on Star Tours because he needed to be able to take that knowledge back to Japan for their Star Tours. And since they were going to train him, they thought, well, let's train one of our own people at the same time. And I just happened to be there. So that worked out really, really nicely.
Wow.
Because subs is kind of like the dreaded attraction in Tomorrowland.
Why is that?
It's the most monotonous. Well, it's really monotonous. You spend half your time in the submarine, and the air is kind of weird. The air is always like pushing up at you, this recirculated air, and it's really dark and it's really lonely because you can't really talk to anybody while you're in there. Even the guests. I mean, you have guests with you, but they see your feet.
Yeah.
So that was always the attraction that you try your best to get off of.
Wow. So you'd mentioned that you did a Blast to the Past version of the... What was that about? I remember going to the park during Blast to the Past, but I don't remember the subs. What was that?
Yeah, so when I got trained on subs, that was my very first attraction after being transferred from outdoor vending into Tomorrowland attractions. And Blast to the Past, was this like something like a 6-week event during the off season, trying to bring people in with entertainment. Mm-hmm. And it was all kind of themed to the 50s and the early 60s. And they did an overlay, and I'm willing to bet this is probably Disneyland's first overlay. We think of that as really common now because you've got the the Haunted Mansion Christmas version, Nightmare Before Christmas, and you've got Small World Holiday, and you've even got Jingle Cruise and stuff like that.
Right.
But at the time, that wasn't a common thing to do. But they did an overlay for Blast to the Past with Submarine Voyage, and they changed the spiel, and the spiel would basically like kind of like a DJ, kind of like Wolfman Jack type of thing, and then as he was telling the story of all the fish and mermaids and sea serpents that we're seeing, they would play little snippets of 1950s rock and roll songs.
So random.
Yeah, it was completely random, but it was kind of an older attraction at the time. It really wasn't like, it'd been around a long time. So I actually thought that was a lot of fun.
It wasn't Finding. It was long before Finding Nemo. So yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it. I remember doing that, having that overlay.
Wow.
Yeah, when I see Finding Nemo now, their Finding Nemo version, it's so different. I mean, not just the attraction is different, but the way they operate it is different. We used to jump on and off of those subs all the time. We didn't think anything of it. And now get on the subs at all.
Well, there's been a lot of state involvement coming in after a couple of unfortunate events in 1998 and 2003. There's been a lot of state involvement that has kind of changed the way. I mean, the things that we used to do as cast members to usually it was to get something done. Usually it wasn't to goof off or whatever, but it was just the way we got things done, and we wouldn't be allowed to do those things anymore for safety purposes.
Yeah, and I do think that some of those things seem a little strange to me, but the other things is like it totally makes sense. Like we probably had no business jumping on and off of these subs in the first place. I think about like working the routes in Fantasyland. We in Fantasyland, the dark rides like Dumbo, Teacups Alice, or that was Route 2, or Peter Pan, Mr. Toad, and Carousel Route 3, be working those. And at the time, like working on Mr. Toad, for example, when we were operating the ride, we were just jogging the vehicles. The vehicles didn't actually stop. They would just slow down. So when you were advancing the vehicles, you're trying to, you would actually have to put your leg out sometimes to like stop the vehicle.
Wow.
And then by the end of the day, and then also Peter Pan, I remember stories on Peter Pan too, that, you're always putting down that lap bar. And by the end of the day, even though I was like super young at the time, it's like, my back would start to ache by the end of the day. So I'm sure that all those changes are, many of those changes are probably very welcomed by the people that are working them now.
Those repetitive motions, as well as the sounds and music that, just become, you hear it so much, it just becomes part of the background,
Yeah.
I remember wearing earplugs on Space Mountain and also Indiana Jones. Those were two locations that were kind of loud, and most people would wear earplugs. Yeah. And towards the end of my 10 years working there, I started to wear earplugs on almost every ride. It's like I realized that the sound level may not be at a dangerous level, but in my mind I was thinking, this loud music is played in my ear 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week for years and years and years. Like I should do my part to mitigate any damage.
So you had mentioned to me that you worked on the Skyway, and that's an attraction that's extinct now. How was that?
I got trained on the Skyway. I was statused in Tomorrowland at the time, but I was a B. Mm-hmm. So, I was regular part-time, they called it, where you worked 5 days a week and you got benefits. This is basically full-time, but you didn't necessarily get full-time hours all the time, like during the off-season, basically. Especially like January and February back in those days. And I was status in Tomorrowland, but they would cross-train you in other areas to just make sure that you're getting the proper number of hours. Mm-hmm. So they trained me on Skyway, but I only worked Skyway for a day. I through the training, and then just for like a day or two. Oh, okay. For some reason, I just never really pulled the hours up there. But I kind of liked it. I liked the fact that it was pretty manual and physical. Kind of reminded me of Canoes. I work Canoes as well. Oh, yeah. And it's, kind of nice to be physical throughout the day. Get some exercise.
For sure. Yeah, it seems like you were everywhere. I mean, every land
Yeah,
just about. Yeah.
yeah. I eventually, when Splash Mountain opened, I was part of the opening crew there. Um, and so I worked with, Kim and Brian and Mason, some of the past guests that you guys have had on some of your shows.
Yeah.
And once I got trained on Splash Mountain, I was on the opening crew. Then I started to learn a lot of the rides on the west side, Pirates and Mansion and Bear Band and the Canoes and things like that.
Did you compete in the canoe races?
I never did because that would happen during the summer, and I was just a night person. Like waking up that early just sounded horrible to me.
Yeah.
But something I did do, I didn't do the canoe races, but I did do canoe testing.
Oh.
So there was one time where they got a bunch of us on the west side, and we got there, early in the morning, and before the park opened, and they had us on the canoe, and they got us in the middle of the river, and then they were purposely having us try to tip it over.
Oh.
So we would just get rowdier and rowdier and rowdier until eventually, we fell in.
Oh no.
So I've actually been in that icky water.
Oh. So you said you're in the west side a lot, and Pirates, Haunted Mansion. I mean, working especially those two rides, there's so much history to those attractions. And did you get to kind of learn some of the ins and outs of the attraction, and I don't know, behind the scenes
like
stuff?
on Haunted Mansion, when they train you, they take you up into I forgot what it's called, like the tower, I think.
The crow's nest, or
yeah, it's up top. It's on the upper level, and it's the room, and then people have engraved their names in there, so you can see. It was probably, let me think, 89. It was probably the early 90s when I got trained on Haunted Mansion. So there had been people signing their names in there since 1969. So that was kind of cool to see.
Yeah.
And try to find people's names and everything.
That is cool.
And as far as like the ins and outs of Pirates of the Caribbean, you get to see, of course you get to see things like boat storage and stuff like that. But one of the kind of like infamous places was the Mylar table. They had a Mylar table because remember the fire effects. You know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I do.
So in the burning scenes, the fire scenes, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the fire was created by shining like a red light onto Mylar, like crinkled Mylar, kind of like aluminum foil. And so they had a room where they stored all the Mylar, and it was kind of deep into the attraction. And then that's when people that wanted to hide from everybody and do things that you can't do in front of other people would go hide. So that's where all the shenanigans happened.
Wow.
Did you do Phantasmic Guest Control?
I did. I never really got scheduled there, but I would pick up overtime there. Just by that time, I was already a B, and I was had enough seniority to get day shifts.
I see. Okay.
But I would work a lot of overtime, so there was several times where I'd pick up overtime, and I always thought that was a cool place to pick up overtime because I would have worked on an attraction during the daytime, and then that would give me a chance to do something totally different, at nighttime.
Yeah, well, because you were there when their first season was 1992. The summer of 1992 was when it started, and it was. People would be starting to wait like at 4 in the afternoon,
wow.
for the 9 p.m. show. So it would start to cause guest control problems, and there was a lot of guest control involved with that show. This is long before they thought of kind of having people reserve spots for the show.
Yeah, it was very different then for sure. And that was, the first time we'd ever had, I was going to say it's the first time we had mass crowds on the west side. That's not actually true though, because there were some times where they would have river shows. That was a little bit before my time, but back in the day, they would actually have like name entertainment at Disneyland. Like I remember, like for instance, at Space Mountain stage, they had Captain and Tennille, but at the time they were only like 10 years past their heyday. They weren't. They were still very much in the public eye. They would have groups like that, and they would used to have groups on the river, and so that was kind of like the predecessor to Fantasmic as far as having crowds out there. But it was nothing that was on a regular basis like Fantasmic was, for sure.
Yeah, before Splash Mountain opened, the west side would get really quiet at night. Well, especially, that part of the west side, because, okay, you do have Pirates, you do have Haunted Mansion, but then, you think about it, there's Bear Country. And the show in Bear Country is inside, and the canoes have stopped for the day. Tom Sawyer Island's closed down. You have the Mark Twain running, and it would stop for the fireworks shows. But it was a much quieter thing at night out there. And then, of course, you had Splash Mountain, which adds some noise to it. And then, of course, Fantasmic comes along in 1992. So, yeah, it becomes very different.
On the west side, before Splash Mountain was open, when I was in outdoor vending, I remember there was a winter evening that I worked on an ice cream wagon. And of course, in the winter at nighttime, it's cold, or at least it can be cold. And it was cold that night. So, not a lot of people want ice cream. So I was, pretty bored just trying to pass the time. And, I had my ice cream wagon, and inside my ice cream wagon, of course, to keep the ice cream cold, we had dry ice, which, dry ice can leave you with like burn marks on your hands and stuff like that if you're not careful. So they would give us like gloves. And since I was bored on the west side because it was so quiet at nighttime, I built myself a little snowman inside of the car. And the supervisor came by, and she checked just to see how much stock I had, just to make sure the relief, there was a relief that was responsible for your brakes, and they were responsible for stocking your wagon because, you couldn't do it. You were stuck at your wagon. She saw the snowman, and she didn't say anything to me, but I later heard from a friend that she wanted to get mad at me, but she thought that it's too slow. I can't, it's
yeah.
I gotta go.
That's great.
The things you do to endure the boredom. I loved working at Disneyland, but there were definitely some boring times.
Back in those days, there were some slow times. It's hardly at all, from what I understand, it's hardly at all like that, now. And right now, people it seems like they're so understaffed that, it's tough to keep up. But yeah. So you got to do spot. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I feel like it's been about 15 years of like there is no off season anymore.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
I remember in my day, there was very stark market difference between summer. You had summer and like spring break and Christmas, and then the rest of the year was so much slower. And then if you looked at like January and February, especially during the week, it was like a ghost town. It was so slow. And like those days are just completely gone.
Yeah, even up to the time I left, it was, January, February, like you mentioned, still had times where they were ERing us, if we wanted to go home early. And I heard that before the shortage of cast members, that didn't happen anymore.
You mentioned ER. It's making me think of that. That's jargon that we used in Disneyland, for early release. And still to this day, there's times where I find myself wanting to use those terms with people that don't understand those terms. Just the other day, I'm an avid tennis player. I play almost every day, and we were playing doubles, but instead of having 4 people, we had 5 people, so we had to kind of like rotate around. So it reminded me of a rotation on an attraction. We'd come up to people and say, okay, it's a bump, or I'm going to bump in or bump out. All these things we would say on the attractions.
Yeah.
And, I was so tempted to say those things. It's like, these people aren't going to understand me.
That's true.
Yeah, there's a whole jargon that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Did you end up working? You ended up working Indiana Jones?
I did. So I had such a good time on the Splash Mountain opening crew. That was really, really fun. And so when Indiana Jones came up, I signed up for that as well. A difference, though, between the two, on Splash Mountain, I was picked really early on, so I was able to do test and adjust before the ride opened, before the attraction opened, which was really fun, to be there in the middle of the night and just cycle the attraction empty while they're doing tests and stuff like that. With Indiana Jones, I was picked basically like more or less on opening day. So I never worked the test and adjust stage of the attraction, but I did operate the attraction right from the beginning.
Had some very long lines when it first opened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really loud in there. That's a place where we all wore earplugs for sure.
Oh yeah, you could hear it. The right conditions, you could hear from outside the show building. You could hear the noises, for quite a ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like the two attractions where people wear earplugs the most would be Space Mountain because like the catapults, of the brakes and all of that. And also the wah, 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 noise that was in there. And then Indiana Jones because it was just so loud. But the difference is like Space Mountain, I'd say like maybe half the people would wear them. And on Indiana Jones, I think everybody did.
So that ride every ride has a rotation, right? Every attraction. You're saying most of the bigger ones do.
Well, they all did back in those days, but that's all changed. So we would have a rotation, and it would be like 3 or 4 positions, and we'd rotate through each one every time somebody came back from a break. We would bump to the next position. And then once we got to the end of the rotation, we'd bump out and take a break. And then when we come back, we'd start it all over again. And it made attractions really kind of fun because, it is a tedious job. It is really repetitious, but, it gave you the variety. And then we also, this is something that's really pretty unfair, but we really got a lot more breaks than other departments because of those because of the rotations. We wouldn't just get 2 breaks and a lunch. We would get a lot of breaks.
Yeah.
But something that's completely changed now. They brought in a system called CDS, system, and that's basically that CDS software tells you where to go, and it tells you when to take your break and things like that. I think that also, you had mentioned about a lot of the laws have changed, in the meantime. And I think that some of the laws have changed as far as, breaks and lunches and stuff like that. So I think CDS also ensures that they're in compliance with the law. Not that they ever really had a problem with it.
Yeah, I think that was an issue, I think, with a lot of departments. I think it also affected custodial where, the state found out that there were times where people would have to, they felt like they had to skip their breaks or they weren't getting their lunch or whatever. And so, granted, there were times that balanced out where you got, there were other days, slow days back then when you might have had, more time. But, the unions and the state are saying, no, we can't have that.
Yeah.
You gotta have, we need proof that people are taking their lunch and taking their breaks. So we're going to bring in this computer system that proves it, documents it. So, yeah.
Right.
And something that it did do is that it did make it more fair across departments, because of course it would vary. You know, some of the attractions we would work, we would generally get more than 2 breaks and a lunch, but then there'd be other attractions we'd work where we would get a lot more. So it certainly makes it, with CDS, they certainly makes it so it's more fair as far as comparing attractions to other departments that, would normally only get their 2 breaks and a lunch.
Well, do you have any stories that you want to mention about, I don't know, just anything, when someone says, oh, you worked at Disneyland, tell me about it or whatever.
Well, I think that, one of the stories that I think of is, I've really focused in a lot on Disney jargon recently, because, I made that YouTube video, a YouTube video about Walt Disney World and Disneyland jargon on my YouTube channel. And so, I started thinking, okay, what are some stories about Disney jargon? And one of the stories I thought of is I had a friend that when he hired in and he was going through the training, of course, the employee cafeteria at the time, was called the In-Between. Mm-hmm. And so it was time to take their lunch, and some other new cast members were asking him, he said, okay, well, what can we do during our lunch? And he was like, oh, okay, well, we could go to the In-Between, or we could go to a break room. And they didn't understand him, and they said, well, what is it in between? And it just kind of makes me laugh. It's like, you just take these things for granted,
Right.
We all speak this common language, and it's like, if you're not part of that inside group, you don't understand it.
Yeah.
I've even had a time where I was at a get-together, and most of us were Disney people or ex-Disney people, and there was a couple non-Disney people there. And at one point, of course, we're talking about the park, and the 2 non-Disney people, the one kind of had this empty look, questioning the other person, and the other guy turned to him and said, oh, when they're talking about the park, they're talking about Disneyland.
That's true, yeah.
It's like all this is taking place at my local park, and here I just thought there were walking trails, Yeah.
I know, it just seems like it almost seems ludicrous if you're on the inside, because well, of course we're talking about Disneyland, but it's not so obvious to people that are not part of this lingo.
Well, even the term cast member, I've had people, here in Utah that I work with, and they're like, would question, oh, I thought you were in custodial. Like, oh no, that's just what they call, you have to explain it. And again, like you said, they just take it for granted. Like, everyone should know. I mean,
yeah, I think that's really kind of clever, the way that, they're using jargon to frame the experience. Mm-hmm. Like you said, cast member, it kind of elevates you from an employee or right. Guest, since we call them guests. It makes us think of them in a different light than just, a customer or patron or whatever. After I left Disneyland, I went into teaching, and I remember a principal calling the students, and I'm just, these were just elementary school kids. She called them scholars. And I thought to myself, oh, that is so Disneyland of you. It's like I can see right through that, and I respect it. It's a good idea.
Inside the berm, outside the berm, yeah.
And then call your uniform a costume, and they think you're, part of a show or a character or something.
Yeah.
Or hey, that's bad show. That's bad show over there.
Yeah, bad show and good show. You can't frame it. And then, sometimes we would use jargon to exclude people so that they didn't understand. Mm. Like, if you said, "Oh, there's a code V in the cab in the Star Tours cabin," well, code V, of course, is, especially you guys coming from custodial know that means vomit. Right. But you don't want guests to hear that. Think about that.
Right, medical cleanup, yeah, all that stuff.
So I have a question for you guys. When we were working on the attractions, and if there was a code V and somebody vomited, and then, if we called custodial, in the meantime, we would put what we called pixie dust on The vomit, like to let it soak up, hopefully to make your job easier when you came. Did you guys call it that as well?
Oh,
Uh,
the
Pixie dust.
pixie dust. Yeah.
We would just say bag of dust. You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or and you could tell how big it was. Oh, it was a 4-bagger. Oh man, yeah, it was a. Of course, 4-bagger for custodial, we would use the stuff really specifically. We could apply it. Whereas in other departments, somebody might open the bag and toss it from a distance because they didn't want to get close to it.
Oh, I was probably guilty of that.
Yeah. Star Tours was fun because if somebody,
Oh, yeah.
I hope nobody's eating when they're listening to this, but inside one of the cabins, of course, with all the movement of the cabin, stuff could just run all over the place.
Oh yeah, I did one of those by myself. I had to clean it up. It was everywhere.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
terrible. I remember seeing a Code V on Star Tours once, and it was Mickey's month, which was like this promotion, like 6-week promotion of Mickey's birthday, and they had, and so I looked at the Code V, and I knew exactly where they ate. They ate at Space Place because you could see like the birthday cake and the cottage fries, and I'm like, oh, still to this day, I have that memory stuck in my head.
Well, I'm sure we could talk a lot more. I had some other things I wanted to mention, but I think we need to have you back because there's so much more to talk about. You've been there for a long time.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah, definitely going to do that again.
This was fun.
But I
Yeah, with all
appreciate
the
you
different
coming in.
attractions that you worked, I really definitely want to pick your brain some more about your experiences.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was one of the best things about working there was getting the variety for sure. I really enjoyed that, being able to work all the different attractions. I guess now that people that work there now, they pretty much just work like 1 or 2 attractions for quite a while. And I guess if you're on the right one, that's probably good. But if you're on the wrong one, oh my gosh. Well,
Well,
thank you for having me. And
yeah, and I wanted to mention that you said you mentioned your YouTube channel. Can you tell everyone about that, how they can find it, and what it's about, actually?
yeah, okay, thank you. My YouTube channel is called Palm Springs Linguists. So Palm Springs is where I live now. And then linguists, of course, like linguistics, language. So, while I was at Disneyland, I started to study linguistics. And which is just the study of different languages and how languages work and stuff like that. So my YouTube channel, Palm Springs Linguist, it's all about language and linguistics, and I go to like travel destinations, and especially here out in the Coachella Valley in the California desert, but I also go to places like Disneyland and Knott's and stuff like that, and national parks. So one of my top videos is about Walt Disney World and Disneyland jargon. So, people can check that out. And the way to find it is just to go on to YouTube and then just type in Palm Springs Linguist. Or you can type in Disneyland jargon and it should come right up.
Awesome. Very good. All right, it was nice chatting with you, Andrew, and we'll have to do this again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.